Hi, welcome to Board Gems. In this video series, I like to introduce to you older board games, and I can offer my opinion as whether I think they're still good games today. The game I'm covering this time is Expedition Northwest Passage. It's published by Matagot and designed by Yves Tourigny. It's for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, I would say. Maybe 12 and up. I forget what the box says. And I think the box says 60 minutes. I think that's fairly fair for, let's say, a 3-player game in which people are a little bit experienced. It'll go a little bit longer for 4 players, or if everybody's new. The board depicts a map which is not yet filled in. Players will be playing tiles onto the board to try to fill in the gaps in which they can move their ship through, with the goal of getting points. One of the main ways of getting points is to find the Northwest Passage, to get through to the other side of the map. And you get points if you get back. There's a timer, and the timer is a solar disk which moves around the board and shows you at what level the ice is at. The tiles depict land and water, and as the solar disk moves, it goes through the seasons and the ice kind of creeps down and freezes the water. Your ship can get stuck in the frozen water, of course, but you also have a sled that you can put out, put your crewmen on the sled to explore. There are other ways of scoring points besides just making it to the Northwest Passage and back. You can explore and find other things. It's an action point system in which the action points are literally crewmen. They're little pawns that you have on your little player board. It requires each round a certain number of crewmen to do certain actions. And it's really clever because you can move your crewmen, some crewmen or all crewmen, onto a sled and have 2 different vessels, I suppose, to explore around. Of course, a sled is limited to land, but if the water is frozen, the sled can treat all the frozen water as land. There are several big decision points in the game. When to unleash your sled, whether you do at all. How many crewmen to move onto the sled. Do you want to get your ship down as far south as possible so it doesn't get frozen? Or do you accept the fact that your ship is going to get frozen and expect that and get the sled out there? Do you spend much time exploring around the map, trying to get points in other ways? Because there's lots of points that can be had if you're not necessarily just focusing on finding the Northwest Passage. Let me show you how this plays. Then afterwards, I would like to talk to you about whether I think it's a gem. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players. Put the little tokens in a pile near the board, and this is the solar disk. This shows the line above which on the map the water is frozen, below which the water is not frozen and is navigable. That's going to start here. The game takes place over 10 rounds, and each round this will move counterclockwise to the next space. And it's going to go around like this until the 10th and final round. Take the square tiles and sort them by type and place on the piles here. You're going to take all the double tiles, they're long tiles like this. You can have a look. They have some combination of water and land. They may have a feature on them, like in this case it has a cairn, and they're double-sided mirror images of each other. It can be helpful to understand kind of the math behind it. Basically, on this sort of tile, there are 6 points, and each point is either water or land. Water, land, water, 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 water. And so the art is just like, so this is land, this is water, so in between it's going to be like this. It's easier said than done, but when you're playing the game, it's helpful to think of the points as opposed to the sides. It's just, you may find it easier to match things up. So you're going to take all the double tiles, you're going to put them in the bag and mix them up, and draw 4 to put here on the board. Add the scoring tokens based on number of players. I'm going to set it up for a 2-player game, at which point you're going to look at the Northwest Passage. It needs a 3 and a 10 for a 2-player game. 3 and 10. And Greenland just needs 1, which is a 6. There we go. The rest can go back in the box. Each player is going to get one mat, and all the wooden pieces of a single color, of the matching color. They have one tall ship, which will start on Greenland, on this arrow here. They have one sled, which they're just going to keep near their mat. They're going to get one disc for scoring, and that's going to be placed on or near the 0. And you're going to get 8 crewmen, one of which is actually going to go up here to track turn order, and the rest are going to go on your player mat. There are 4 spaces that the crewmen can go. This column is for crewmen on the tall ship. Later on, you may unleash your sled, at which point you can move crewmen to the sled, and they'll be in this column. But they all start on the ship because your sled is not out on the board. All 7 go on the top. That means they're awake and ready. As they get used, you're going to slide them down to this side, which means they're pooped after doing the action you told them to do, and they're going to rest. I'll just finish setting it up for the 2-player game. Take the player crewmen that you've set aside for the turn order and mix them up and draw them one at a time to determine the starting turn order for the first round. These icons represent these tokens on the board, and they're tokens that can be picked up. So the ones that are pre-printed on the board, just place little tokens on them to show that players can pick those tokens up. As these tiles may be added to the board, you may add other tokens. Some other ones here, you have this, which is a compass rose, indicating that you found a strait between 2 land masses. This one is an Inuit, and this one is a wreck, part of the Franklin expedition, which has come before you, and you can find tokens of that type. So you can see there are 5 types of tokens, and those are shown on the player mat. These 2 and these 2 are the 4 that I showed you here, and this is one that doesn't appear on the board, but you can claim whenever you complete a landmass. The game takes place over 10 rounds, and by the end of 10 rounds, the player with the most points wins. You get points for making it to the Northwest Passage. The earlier you make it to the Northwest Passage, the more points you'll get. You will get points by making it back to Greenland earlier than other players. If you can't make it back to Greenland, you will lose points. And you will get points for collecting these tokens. These square tokens are worth 2 points multiplied by the region they're in. You see times 1, times 2, times 3. So picking up this cairn token would immediately give you 2 points. 2 times 1. If you picked up a cairn here, you would get 6 points. The round tokens are only worth 1 point times the region it's in, but there's majority scoring at the end. So the player with the most straight tokens will get 11 points. The player who is second in straight tokens will get 5, assuming they have at least 1, and so on. That's the case for the straight, for the wreckage, the Franklin expedition, and these are cartography tokens. Whenever a player places a tile such that it completes a landmass, so it's land surrounded by either water or the edge of the board, that player immediately gets a cartography token, which is immediately worth a number of points based on how many tiles large the landmass is. This, you can see, is 3 tiles large. 1, and then there's the 2 pre-printed on the board. 2 to 3 tiles is worth 1 point. This player will just get 1 point for completing this landmass. But the larger the landmass, the more points it's worth. You will also get a bonus 6 points for every complete set of 5. You will lose 2 points at the end of the game if you cannot get your ship back to Greenland, and every crewman that you were not able to get back to Greenland is another 2-point loss. The game starts with each player in turn order claiming one of these 4 double tiles. Just claim one. Normally I don't put the tokens on until they're actually on the board, just keep them nearby. But each player may take one, and keep it in front of them, immediately replace it, and then player 2 may take one. And now the game's ready to begin proper. The game takes place over 10 rounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And in a round, players will be performing actions by spending crewmen. And as they spend a crewman, they will go down here to show that they've been used. Or they can pass. If they pass, they are out for the round, they are done. And if they've used all their crewmen, then they have to pass. The first player to pass will move their marker down here and will be start player for the next round. At the end of the round, you would then move these back up and that would be the new turn order. The possible actions are listed on the bottom. The number in the black circle is how many crewmen it takes to perform that action. You can always perform one action on your turn for the cost shown on the player mat. But you're actually able to perform more than one action on your turn, and you can perform the same action more than once. The first action costs the number printed in the black circle. For every additional action you do on the same turn, it's this cost plus 1. So if I wanted to draw 2 tiles from the display, or draw a tile and then immediately play it, I would spend 1 to draw the tile. Now I could stop there, and on my next turn I could do that action for 1. Or I could do it now, still my turn. I'm not done yet. I performed my first action, I can do a second action. Let's suppose I want to place it on the board. I would spend the 1 for this and an additional 1 for doing an extra action. Every action beyond the first costs 1 more than is shown. If you don't have the crewman available, then you can't do that action. The first action, take a tile. You can take any of the 4 double tiles that are shown here, or any of the single tiles that are shown here. These are always the same from game to game. There are the 6 possible combinations that could be placed on the board, and whatever 4 happen to be here. If you take one of these, then you immediately replace it. For 2 crewmen, you can get rid of these 4 tiles, draw 4 additional tiles, and pick one of those to add to your hand, and these will actually go back into the bag. For 1 action, you can play a tile from your hand. A tile you may happen to have here, you can place it on the board. You can only place a tile in an empty space adjacent to your ship or your sled. I'll come to the sled in a second. Right now, the player's ships are on this arrow space. All the spaces next to them are completed. For 1 crewman, you can move your ship or your sled. In this case, you could move your ship for 1 action to here, or to here, or to here. Always, of course, following the water. So from here, for example, if your ship was here, now you could spend 1 crewman to place a tile, like so. And of course, you can also do something like this, right? Of course, later on, a ship can move into this area. Over the course of the game, you may surround a single square space. If this happens, you'll find the matching square tile that matches this, so water, water, land, land, that's this one, and put it in here. And that still counts as completing the landmass, and that counts as a tile. It's possible, technically, for these tiles to run out of the right type. If that happens, just use the back. You can imagine what the map looks like here. Once you place a tile, if there's an icon on it, you'll place the matching token on top of it. For an action, a player whose ship or sled is on top of the tile, the same tile as a token, a player can spend crewmen to pick up the token. For a round token, obviously not the cartography tokens, because as I said, you get those if you complete an island. But for the other 2 round markers, the compass rose and the wreckage, it costs 3 crewmen to pick it up. So a ship here with at least 3 crewmen available can spend 3 crewmen to pick up the token. And they can just keep it near them or on their board, something like that. To pick up a square token, the Cairn or the Inuit, is 2 crewmen. The last action is to add or remove your sled. Out of all the crewmen, and some might be already used and some might not, You will spend one that is not yet used to put down your sled. If there's multiple land masses, you would choose which landmass the sled would go on. So in this case, either here or here. However, and I didn't talk about this yet, this is the solar disk. All water above this line is frozen. So if it actually looked like this ship is stuck in the ice and cannot move. If later on the disk moves up here, now this is water. This is the height of summer here. We're coming in the spring and then summer, but then it's going to be winter and then summer again. a year and a half, basically, more or less. So actually from here, with the disk like this, the ship cannot move into this tile because this is all ice. The ship cannot move into it. However, the ship could put down their sled. There's one landmass on this tile. The sled always goes onto the same space as the ship. If the water is thawed, is wet, if the water is soft, then you have to choose which landmass on the same tile the sled goes on. But if the water is frozen, then the sled is considered to be on the entire tile. And same for this. If a ship on this tile is considered to be on the whole tile. But it can be the case, for example, something like this, if the ship is here, it is actually considered to be below the frozen line. It's on the whole tile wherever it's allowed to be. And whereas a sled here is on this landmass, it can't go over to this landmass, but later on, if that freezes, then the sled can move. And sled can move over frozen water just like land. Now when a player puts down their sled, they have to choose which crewmen are moved onto the sled out of all 7 crewmen. So you can decide to move 4 of them to the sled. You'd have to choose which 4. Maybe the 3 that are already spent and one of these guys. And of course, putting down the sled costs 1 action. And you would again choose a crewman to move down to indicate that that crewman has been used to perform the action. And in this case, you could move either this one, at which point the sled has no actions left, or this one. When the ship and the sled are separate, they do actions separately. So if the sled is up here and the ship is down here, and you want to add a tile to the board for 1 crewman, the question you have to ask yourself is, next to which location? If you're placing a tile here or here, that's next to the ship, and you'd have to use a ship's crewman. If you're placing it here or here, you're placing it next to the sled, you'd have to use a sled's crewman. It would cost 1 action if they are on the same space to put the sled back onto the ship. The sled would go back here, and you would move everybody back. But that's only possible if they're on the same space. And those are the different actions. So the flow of the game is a player does 1 action if they're able to, or pass. If they pass, they're out for the round. After they perform an action, they may perform a second action, but there's a 1 crewman extra cost for doing a second action. And if they want to do a third action on their turn, they can spend a crewman as an extra cost of doing a third action in a row. But that's optional. They can just hang on to their crewman, move slower, and do those actions 1 per turn. White's turn comes around again, they can do another action. And maybe that's all they want to do. And then they go around again, it's their turn again, they can do a third action. And there's no extra cost to that. It's just if they want to do more than 1 action on the same turn, there's a penalty for that. But it may be necessary. Maybe you want to pick up this cairn before another player gets to it. I'm gray. As 1 turn, I can go 1 to here, and then I can spend 2 plus 1 to immediately pick up this cairn. If you don't have any actions left, you must pass, but of course, you can pass early. As they pass, they will move their marker down to the far left space that's available. So if white passes first, white goes here. Gray later on finishes their actions, gray goes there. Second round, this marker moves up here. And we move these back. And as you can see now, white will go first. It's important to see how the movement of the solar disk affects the water on the board. At the start of the game, Everything above this line is frozen. Starting second round, the whole board is now open for your ships. There is no frozen water. At least not on the board, it's up here somewhere. But in rounds 3 and 4 and 5, you can see it's getting frozen. More and more frozen, more and more of the board becomes inaccessible for your ship. And by the time it gets here, it is now no longer possible for a ship to make it into the Northwest Passage until the spring thaw here. But maybe if you can get your ship close enough, you can put down your sled and your sled can make it the rest of the way. The first player to move their ship or sled into this arrow, the Northwest Passage, first player to do so will get the largest token that is available and will get this many points. Other players who successfully make it to Northwest Passage will get progressively smaller values. It is not required to make it to the Northwest Passage. It's just worth points. Likewise, making it back to Greenland. It is not necessary, but you also lose points if you are unable to get back to Greenland. You lose 2 points for your ship. If you lose your ship, it doesn't get back to Greenland in time, and -2 for every crewman that doesn't make it back to Greenland. It is technically possible that a player could immediately, on the first round, go back to Greenland, pick up the token, and they're done. And their final score would probably be, in this case, 6. And the other players can still play the full game, and this person can go watch TV or something. At the end of the game, the player with the most straight tokens will get 11 points. Second place, if they have at least one, will score 5 points. If there's a tie, then they both get the lesser value. So say in a 3-player game, first and second are tied. First and second would both get 5 points, and third place, assuming they had at least 1 token, would get 2. You can see these 3 tokens have 3 different scoring charts. No scoring charts, no majorities for these ones, but if every complete set, 1 of each of the 5 tokens, you'll get a bonus 6 points, and -2 for losing your ship and for every crewman. You don't lose points for losing the sled. That's it. You're ready to play Expedition Northwest Passage. If you've watched a number of my videos, you might have caught me occasionally mentioning a game's arc. It's something that's important to me. Does the game tell a story? Not necessarily literally, like Tales of the Arabian Nights, where you're reading paragraphs out loud. Does the game mechanisms and acting through those mechanisms to navigate through the game, does it tell a story? Does the beginning of the game feel different from the middle, feel different from the end? Absolutely you can in this game. And there's a beautiful marriage in this game between the mechanisms and the setting. For me, in order for me to be able to accept a game's complexity, and I'm not saying this game is particularly complex, certainly not by today's standards, but the most important thing about complexity is whether it's in service to the theme and setting. Because the theme and setting acts as a mnemonic to help you learn the game and help you remember the game after you've learned it. You're not necessarily memorizing the rules as they're being taught to you and you have to remember this does that. When you understand the mechanisms as it connects to the setting, that helps solidify in your mind. It gives an anchor, pardon the pun, for the mechanisms to latch onto. In game terms, I do this, which means in real world terms, that means this, and they match, right? This is, for me, a poster child, a perfect example of marrying mechanisms to settings in a way that gels. It, for me at least, it really gels in the mind because everything kind of fits in together very well. You have your ship. The ship obviously can't move if it's on frozen ice. You have a sled that you can put out, and the sled can move on frozen ice. And you can, as soon as you're describing this, you can kind of picture the potential pitfalls in game terms. right? If my ship is frozen in the ice, it can't move, right? I can put the sled out and the sled can move on the ice. That's great. But then if the ice melts, the sled could get stuck. At several points during the game, there are important decisions. And the decision itself is simple in the sense that you don't have like a ton of options. You might have 2 options, or you might have a couple of options, and you have to decide which one to do. And in that decision, the whole game can rest on that decision. Usually by the time your ship gets to the Northwest Passage, enough time has passed that it's winter. The ice freezes, the ship can't move. So, okay, at some point you probably will have to put out your sled. Where and when, and how many crewmen to move onto the sled, because the crewmen are the action points. The crewmen are most useful when they're all together, because you can spend crewmen to do additional actions. Well, once you split up your crewmen, then you have some in the sled and some in the ship. Now both of those are a bit more limited. They can't move as far in a single round. Do you make it to the Northwest Passage? Do you go all out to try to get there early? If you're falling behind, do you even bother to get there at all? Because you could just spend a whole bunch of time just cruising around trying to pick up tokens and get points that way. And of course, by the end, you're trying to map out how best to get back to Greenland, back to the start, before you run out of time, because you can lose big points if you don't make it back. All these decisions individually are not complicated decisions. They're simple decisions, but the whole game can rest upon them. By the end, the story of the game can be described from big decision to big decision, right? At this point, I put out the sled, but I didn't put enough people on the sled, so the sled was moving slowly, because I was hoping to still do things with the ship, with the other crewmen on there. But in the end, I felt like I couldn't make it to the Northwest Passage and make it back in time to get back to Greenland. And then there's the tension at the end, right? Am I going to make it back? Now, often I talk about interactiveness in games, interactivity. I often don't like games that aren't very interactive. Like, I love racing games, but a lot of racing games aren't very interactive, right? And this is, in a manner of speaking, a racing game. So is it very interactive? Not very. But what you do find is players are competing with each other very tightly for both short and long-term goals. If a token comes down and 2 different players want it, it's kind of a challenge to see how can I get it, because I know that they could burn through crewmen to do an extra action on their turn, and maybe they'll snatch that out from under me. So there's this constant pressure from the other players, and that lends into also how efficient do you want to be with your actions, because you have a limited number of actions for the whole game. 7 crewmen, some actions take more than 1 crewman, and you only have 10 rounds. Do you really want to waste them to try to get a token before somebody else? Maybe it's better to hang on to them. The game keeps its tension all throughout. Can I get to this token before the other players? Can I get to the Northwest Passage before the other players? I have a tile that has a token. If I put it down, is somebody else going to get the token before I get a chance to? You can also work with other players. 2 players can kind of work together to kind of push through the ice, so to speak, right? Put down tiles in front of both of them so they both have a path. And if one person's going alone, maybe they have a harder time of it. There are things like this, and they really did a great job keeping that pressure, that tension going all the way through the first 2/3 of the game, and then you're trying to make it back to Greenland, and there's the tension there. That's not tension with other players, but that's a whole other form of tension as well. It's a very tense game. It can potentially frustrate people on a first game because of those big decisions that can make or break your game. And if you make a poor decision in that, yeah, it could mean the win is out of reach. Personally, I think the game is still fun even if you make a bad decision, because again, it's part of the story. It's the story of your crew, of your ship. What happened to them? Did they make it? Did they not? Right? How did the expedition fail? You can easily see when you look back, it's like, okay, I could have done this differently. The way the seasons work, it basically takes place over 2 years. So like the spring of one year around to the autumn of the following year. And that's how much time you have to make it potentially to the Northwest Passage and back. Well, usually, by the time you make it to the Northwest Passage, it's winter. And a lot of the water is frozen. And again, that's where that big decision comes in about how to deal with that, right? Where to put out the sled, how many crewmen to put on. But the game kind of directs the tension, the flow of the story into that direction. It's timed so that usually by the time you make it down to the Northwest Passage, it's winter and there's a lot of ice. And then you have to decide to give up, or do you wait for the thaw and then get there? You might not be first, but you can still do it, but then you need enough time to get back before the next winter comes. What can I say? The game mechanisms help tell a story. The mechanisms just fit the setting so well that they just kind of blur away. Once you learn the game, it's super, super intuitive. There are some things to note, and I don't necessarily consider them bad things. My experience is a lot of people find the tile laying part very challenging. The tiles they're double tiles, so they're rectangular. So a double tile basically has 6 points around the tile, and each of those points is either water or land, right? So if there's a point of water here and a point of land here, then the art on the tile is going to be coastline in the middle. My experience is, even when I explain that to people, they still have a hard time visualizing how the tiles are going to fit on the board. In a lot of these tile laying games, tiles aren't double-sided. The double sides are the mirror image. People often forget. They grab a tile and they say, oh, let me just try it. And they'll grab a tile and they'll try to fit it and see if it doesn't quite fit. It looks like it can kind of fit, but it doesn't really. And then you say, well, maybe if you flip it over, you can finagle it the way you need it to. Some people have a problem with that. A fair number of people will have some challenge while they're playing the game. You'll find that the end of the game can sometimes slow down quite a bit because people are kind of mathing out, like, okay, I have enough actions to get back. Do I have enough actions to swing up here and pick up this token before I go back? Sometimes you feel like you can almost make it work and you can't quite. To me, that's part of the charm of the game, though, is the map, because you move the ship from tile to tile, the sled from tile to tile, and the tiles are double-sided and they can be arranged in all sorts of different directions. You feel kind of geographical when you're trying to map out, how do I get back? If I go down here, it actually, it's about the same number of actions. It looks longer, but because the double-sided tiles, the double tiles are kind of arranged that way, it actually takes just as long or just as short, and maybe I have enough time to pick up a token. The tokens themselves are really, really tiny, just a heads up. And component-wise, that's the only complaint I think anybody could possibly have about this game. It's not a big deal, honestly. The production is really nice. I love the presentation. It's full of earth tones, grays and browns. The player colors are gray and brown and black and white, right? It's a very muted color scheme, which I feel fits really well. They really nailed the presentation. Right? The bag you're drawing tiles out of is kind of burlap. It's a really rough material. And throughout the insert and everything, and the artwork around the outside of the board really has sort of an old tall ships kind of vibe to it. Matagot just absolutely nailed the presentation. I'm a huge fan of this game. And pretty much, I think most people I've introduced it to have liked it a lot as well. Some have actually been like, oh, can I find this game? Where can I get this game? This edition has been hard to find for a while. This originally came out 2013. As of right now, I believe when this video comes out, which I think will be March 3rd, 2024, at this time, I believe there should be a Kickstarter or GameFound, anyway, a crowdfunding campaign for a new edition of this. Not from Matagot, but from one of Matagot's sort of partners, Maple Games, Canadian company, Canadian designer. While the presentation is completely refreshed, it doesn't sound like they changed any or many of the mechanisms. The game still plays great, which is my main concern. It looks like exactly the same gameplay, which I'm really appreciative of, because this game to me was already, I couldn't think of ways to improve it. It was already just mwah. So what's different about this new edition that's being crowdfunded? Well, the tiny tokens have been replaced by wooden tokens, maybe as a concern for color blindness. They have different shapes for the different player ships, and I think sleds as well. The board seems to be double layered, so around the outside of the map there's actually looks like a raised edge where the tiles can fit in. That's nice, because the game board actually has some tiles pre-printed. It's a little bit visually odd when some of them are lower than the others in this game, because some of them are printed on the board and some of them are tiles that go on top. But in the new edition, it looks like those pre-printed ones are part of the raised part. There is added content. You generally want to have added content with a new edition. You need some reason to get people to buy the new edition. And in this case, in the new edition, they have an expanded solo mode. So the game box, this one, didn't come with a solo mode, but there was one that was available for free to print, just a single rule sheet. I think I have it here. There's a single rule sheet for the solo mode. I've never tried it myself because I'm not much of a solo gamer. The solo mode that they added to the new edition seems much, much more fleshed out. It almost seems like a completely different game, because they have cards and they have resources that you track, like food and morale, things that don't appear in the multiplayer game. And there is something called the Terror expansion. It is called the HMS Terror edition, Terror being one of the two ships of Franklin's expedition. And it comes in a square box, thick square box, which, you know, those Kallax fans are going to love that. This is rectangular, almost the same as kind of the standard rectangular Lookout and Hans and Gluck, although it's a little bit longer. I know people love their square box games, even if they're like crazy thick. The fact that they haven't changed any rules means that if you're interested in the game, and crowdfunding is an option for you, because for some places, like here in Canada, a lot of times I don't know about this one because the crowdfunding campaign is not live yet, but the publisher is Canadian, so maybe won't be so bad. But a lot of crowdfunding campaigns, the shipping to Canada from, say, the US or wherever is just crazy. If you're interested in the game and the crowdfunding is an option to you, have a look at it. Looks great, and they say it plays the same. That's good enough for me. I personally am really happy with the old edition because I don't play solo. I generally don't care much for expansions, and I love the presentation as it is. So the new edition is not really going to appeal to me, for people who maybe already have the game and love it the way it is. But I'm super happy that there's a new edition that more people can discover, and I hope lots of people discover this. This is, for me, a perfect blend of game mechanisms, setting, intuitiveness, challenge. It is a phenomenal game design. I love it to bits. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Expedition Northwest Passage don't stop being good because newer games come out. Take care.